Before the feature begins, I would like to take this opportunity to address all of you, both our new and our longtime loyal viewers. First of all, I would like to apologize for the most unexpected 9-month hiatus. Believe me, it was no more fun for me than it was for you, and I can assure you, it will not happen again. We have streamlined our editing process, honed our research and our photography process to an even finer point, purchased new computer hardware, new editing software, and essentially done everything possible to ensure that there will be no more 9-month breaks between our videos. Having said that, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly step out of character, address you directly, and ask you one simple favor. From the beginning, we have never had fame or fortune in mind when making these videos. You're not going to get rich on YouTube ad revenue. That is a known fact. The main goal from the very beginning has been to give these cases as much exposure as possible and maybe, just maybe, help to bring one of them to a conclusion. In order to do that, we need your help as much as possible. Therefore, I would like to ask all of you to help us in getting these videos in front of as many people as possible by following one very simple formula, a formula that we call LSLS. Like, subscribe, link, and share. By getting these videos out to as many people as possible, we greatly increase the possibility of them reaching that one person at the right time, the right place, and with the right information that could just possibly crack one of these age-old cases wide open. It is not a pipe dream. It's happened before, and it can happen again, but we cannot do it without your help. So, again, I humbly ask you, please, LSLS. Like, subscribe, link, and share. And also, visit us on Twitter and Facebook at the links given in the video's description. It's great to be back. It really is. And I sincerely hope that you enjoy this upcoming feature. And again, to all of you, thank you. Catching a killer or tracing a missing person is often a frustrating and a nagging process. It is not uncommon in cases of murder or disappearance for law enforcement to have suspects in mind, but be prevented from making an arrest or even divulging a name without compromising the case as a whole, or even worse, facing a libel suit. The investigation is therefore a process that must be built, step by step, and inch by inch. Even in cases where law enforcement are able to make public the names of suspects or persons of interest, building a solid case for prosecution is often an endeavor plagued with dead ends, missteps, and pitfalls. In the case of the 1999 murder of Johnathan Skaggs, the Fayette County Sheriff's Department has spent the last 19+ years gathering and assembling the many pieces to a still incomplete puzzle. Perhaps you can assist them in overcoming an agonizing series of setbacks and enable them to finally wipe this particularly brutal murder investigation off the blotter. Fayette County, West Virginia, Sunday, August 15th, 1999, 12:40 a.m. Deputy J.M. Feltner of the Fayette County Sheriff's Department responds to a 911 call where a man has been reported lying motionless in the roadway. Feltner, fearing the man may have been hit by a car, proceeds to the intersection of West Virginia Route 61 and Dempsey Branch Rd. Upon arrival, Feltner is relieved to see that the unconscious man is uninjured and merely a victim of intoxication. Once roused by Deputy Feltner, the man, 24-year-old Johnathan Wesley Skaggs, refuses medical attention and asks Deputy Feltner if he could simply take him to the nearby home of his friend, Alfred, Clint, Toney, where he could sleep off the after-effects. Eager to get Skaggs to a safe place, Deputy Feltner acquiesced to Skaggs' somewhat unusual request. Feltner transported Skaggs to the Toney residence, roughly 1/2 mile up Dempsey Branch Rd. Feltner later recalled that he observed Skaggs exit his squad car and make his way up to and into the Toney home. Feeling that the matter was now concluded, Deputy Feltner reported himself 10-8 and drove away from the home. He did not give the matter a second thought until 24 hours later. At that time, Feltner was contacted by Skaggs' stepfather, who stated that Jonathan had failed to return home the previous evening or that morning. Feltner reported the events of the previous evening, but Skaggs' stepfather remained uneasy, feeling it was not like Jonathan to up and vanish without so much as a note or a phone call. When Jonathan Skaggs failed to pick up his paycheck from his employer in Oak Hill the following day, the authorities were contacted again. This time, a missing persons investigation was begun. Over 48 hours had passed since Jonathan Skaggs was last seen, and authorities knew that the clock was now their worst enemy. Fayette County Deputy S.D. Snuffer paid a visit to the home of Alfred Clint Toney. Curiously, Toney reported that he had not seen Skaggs recently. Authorities fanned out and began questioning many of Skaggs' friends and family in an attempt to reconstruct his actions leading up to the time he was found by Deputy Feltner. It was learned that Skaggs left his home prior to 11 p.m. on the evening of August 14th to attend a party. The party in question was being held at the Dempsey Branch home of Nicole Thomas, an acquaintance of Skaggs. According to Thomas, Skaggs arrived at her home at around 11 p.m. and later became involved in a physical altercation with one of the other guests. Feeling he had had too much to drink, Thomas stated that she asked Skaggs to leave her home, which he did. Around midnight, some of the guests who had left the party reported that they observed Jonathan Skaggs passed out in the roadway. Around this time, 911 was called and Deputy Feltner was dispatched to the scene at 12:26 a.m., arriving at approximately 12:40 a.m. To authorities, it seemed that something was just not adding up. Deputy Feltner's report clearly stated that he transported Skaggs to the Toney residence at 1 a.m. and observed him enter the home, yet Toney was now stating that he had not seen Skaggs recently. Authorities decided that it was time to have another talk with Clint Toney. This time, Toney admitted that he too had held a party at his home on the night of August 14th, and that Skaggs had been there for some time on the night he went missing. Toney also related that he had built a fire pit within a rock circle near the front of his home, both to provide light and as a place where guests could easily dispose of their trash. Authorities were baffled. They had accounted for Skaggs' movement right up to the moment when he left the site of Deputy Feltner. Then, it was as though the Toney home had swallowed him up without a trace. 2 days later, however, events would take a far more logical and macabre turn. Without being summoned, Clint Toney visited the Fayette County Sheriff's Department and spoke to Detective G.E. Burke. Amazingly, Toney stated that he feared Jonathan Skaggs may have accidentally been burned alive in the fire pit in front of his home. He added that once the fire had burned itself out, he dug out the debris and transported it to a dumping site on property belonging to his grandmother. Authorities checked at the location described by Toney and reportedly noted the odor of burnt and charred flesh. Closer examination revealed what appeared to be a charred metal grommet, the kind used as buttons and fasteners on blue jeans, as well as small fragments of bone. A cadaver dog was brought to the scene and confirmed their suspicions. The dump site did contain human remains. A thorough excavation of the site began immediately and continued for another 15 hours. Evidence gathered at the scene was sent to the chief medical examiner in South Charleston for analysis. The fire pit at the Toney residence was also excavated. Here, too, officers found bits of bone fragments and another charred metal grommet. Evidence gathered at the Toney home was also shipped to South Charleston for analysis. 4 months later, the medical examiner reported his findings. DNA samples taken from the bone fragments confirmed that the remains found in both locations were those of Johnathan Wesley Skaggs. A forensic examination of the remains by the Smithsonian Institute was unable to determine an exact cause of death. The Smithsonian report did state that the shattered condition of the remains resulted from actions that occurred after Skaggs was dead. The report noted a, quote, high degree of fragmentation, reflecting intentional effort to cause breakage. The pattern of burning and the extreme breakage reflect deliberate manipulations and fracturing of the remains while being burned, end quote. In other words, Skaggs' body had been smashed and broken up after the life had left it and then stuffed into the still burning fire pit. A previous canvass of Toney's neighbors revealed that he had been observed tending to the fire at around 6:30 a.m. on Sunday, August 15th. Toney later told investigators that he was burning unwanted items from his home, including a mattress and chair. Authorities, however, remained skeptical. At one point, former Fayette County Sheriff Larry Dotson publicly described the case as the most unusual he had yet seen. Toney's former residence was located here, on Dempsey Branch Rd, about 1/2 mile from where Johnathan Skaggs was found by Deputy Feltner. Aerial as well as ground-level photographs taken at the Toney home in 1999 show that the fire pit was located at the front of the home and against the hillside to the right of the front door. Measurements taken at the time showed the fire pit to be 4 feet 3/4 inches to 5 feet wide, using liberal interpretation. Jonathan Skaggs stood at 5 feet 7 inches tall. Just how had a person at least 7 inches taller than the diameter of the fire pit come to die within its circle? Clint Toney continued to maintain that Skaggs, perhaps still heavily under the influence, must have accidentally stumbled and fallen into the fire pit while the fire was still burning. Toney added that he awoke sometime in the pre-dawn hours of August 15th and noted a foul odor coming from the fire pit. This odor was apparently strong enough to bring on a bout of vomiting. Toney stated that he threw more items atop the blaze in an attempt to counter the stench, and then went back to bed. Again, authorities had trouble swallowing Toney's explanation, but lacked anything in the way of solid evidence to refute it in a court of law. Consistent stories from guests at both the Taylor and the Toney parties only added to the confusion over Toney's changing accounts. At this point, authorities could only state that Alfred Clint Toney was a person of interest in the death of Johnathan Skaggs. Amid accusations of witchcraft and satanic rituals, Toney altered his version of events several times. At one point, he stated that persons who were present at Nicole Thomas's party had killed Skaggs, wrapped his body in a tarp, and dumped it into the fire pit. Toney claimed to have witnessed these actions from inside of his home. The motive? A fight over missing or stolen liquor, reportedly belonging to Skaggs. Toney relayed this version of events while incarcerated at the Southern Regional Jail on an unrelated charge. With little else to go on, the case concerning Johnathan Skaggs' murder soon went cold. Former Fayette County prosecutor Paul Blake brought the case before a grand jury in 2004, but no indictment was returned. Skaggs' uncle, Charles Keenan, pleaded no contest to manslaughter in 2005 for the death of Paul Lafferty. It was alleged that Lafferty's death was a revenge killing by Keenan related to the Skaggs murder. Deputy Feltner, who found Skaggs in the roadway in the early morning hours of August 15th, was later convicted of charges related to embezzlement and served time in the Northern Regional Jail. Both Keenan and Feltner have since passed away. Just as it seemed the Skaggs murder case was about to turn to ice, the flame beneath it was relit in 2015. Newly elected Fayette County Prosecutor Larry Hara again presented the case to a Fayette County grand jury. On September 9, 2015, the grand jury returned a true bill indictment on Alfred Clint Toney. According to Hara, the indictment was solely the result of testimony offered by Fayette County Sheriff Steve Kessler, who had been involved in the murder investigation in its embryonic stages. It was Kessler who had publicly named Toney as the prime suspect in Skaggs' murder in 2014. On September 17, 2015, Toney pleaded not guilty to the charges. Originally, the date for his jury trial was set for November 2nd of the same year, but legal wrangling prohibited the case from coming to trial. In January of 2017, Toney's defense counsel argued that he could not provide an adequate defense for his client, as too many of the key individuals involved in the case were either dead or unable to be located. While agreeing that the investigation into Skaggs' death could have progressed much faster, Fayette County Circuit Judge John Hatcher denied a request for the case to be thrown out on the grounds argued by the defense. He ordered that the matter be allowed to move forward. It was then that another, far more tragic roadblock was thrust into the path of the prosecution. On Wednesday, August 24, 2017, former Fayette County Sheriff Steve Kessler was working in his yard when he accidentally disturbed a bee's nest. Kessler was stung several times. He died of a massive allergic reaction before even reaching the hospital. Kessler was 60 years of age at the time of his death. Following the loss of his key witness, Fayette County Prosecutor Larry Hara felt he had no other choice but to withdraw the indictment against Clint Toney. Toney remained in jail on charges of credit card fraud. Hara retains the right to present his case against Toney to a grand jury at a future date. Even with the loss of former Sheriff Kessler, Hara still hopes to build a conviction against Toney. He knows, however, that time, much as it was in the early stages of the murder investigation, is not on his side. There are two things which we cannot stress strongly enough. One, although Alfred Clint Toney has been indicted for the murder of Johnathan Skaggs, he has never been convicted, and therefore his innocence must be presumed. Two, although authorities have named Toney as the prime suspect in Skaggs' murder, they have never publicly ruled out the possibility that others may have been involved. Given these two facts, the investigation into the murder of Jonathan Skaggs must be considered very active and very open. Authorities would be eager to speak with anyone who may be able to provide them with information helpful in building a successful prosecution against Skaggs' killer or killers. Please pay close attention to the following summation. Police believe that Johnathan Wesley Skaggs was killed sometime in the early morning hours of Sunday, August 15, 1999. Skaggs' broken and charred remains were found both in the ashes of a fire pit at the residence of Alfred Clint Toney and at a nearby dump site where debris from the fire pit was taken. While reasonably certain of the time, police are not certain just how Skaggs died. The residence, formerly occupied by Alfred Clint Toney, is located along Dempsey Branch Rd, about 1/2 mile from the point where it intersects with West Virginia Route 61. Deputy J.M. Feltner of the Fayette County Sheriff's Department picked Skaggs up at this intersection at approximately 12:40 a.m. on August 15th and dropped him off at Toney's residence approximately 20 minutes later. Feltner reported that he observed Skaggs enter Toney's home. Prior to being found by Deputy Feltner, Skaggs had been seen at a party being held at the home of Nicole Thomas. It was reported that Skaggs got into a physical altercation at the party and was asked to leave by Thomas. Skaggs was also reportedly seen at another party that evening being held at the Toney residence. Shaun David Tichner, the man with whom Skaggs was alleged to have had the altercation, recalled in 2017 that there were about 20 people at the party being hosted by Nicole Thomas. The following persons have been publicly named by authorities as having attended the Thomas party: Michelle Ann Miller, James Jones, Shaun Tichner, Samantha Obey, Alfred Clint Toney for only a short time, Amber Bunting, Franklin Petey Daniels, and Nicole Thomas herself. While Daniels and Tichner both offered testimony in 2017, it was reported that authorities were unable to locate either Miller, Bunting, or Thomas. Another guest may have been a man by the name of Shaun or Shaun Andrews, who reportedly has not been seen or heard from since 2000. If you have any information concerning the murder of Johnathan Skaggs, please contact the Fayette County Sheriff's Department at the number listed below, or Crime Stoppers of West Virginia via their website at www.crimestopperswv.com.